met Judy Heumann through my dad. She is one of the greatest disability rights leaders in the world.
Hey Samuel, can you see me?
Yep.
Oh my God, you're not a little boy anymore.
All right. Samuel's going to lead the way.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your Saturday. Judy Heumann was born in 1947 and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Judy was not born with a disability, but she had polio at the age of 18 months and has used a wheelchair most of her life. Were you included in general education?
My mother took me to school in our neighborhood, which is where some of the children went. But I wasn't able to go there because there were no laws at that time, which made it legal to discriminate against somebody like yourself and myself with a disability. So the principal said I couldn't go to the school. And they sent a teacher to my house 2.5 hours a week. So it wasn't until I was in that I actually started going to classes with non-disabled children.
It wasn't until 1975, when Judy was 28 years old, that President Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which was later renamed the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. This new law said that children with disabilities have the right to receive a free public education, just like other children. How did people treat you differently as a child because of your disability?
Even though the houses weren't accessible, kids either came to my house or people just, lifted me up out of my wheelchair and took me into their house or pulled my wheelchair up into their house. But as I got older, people started, kids weren't old enough to drive, but they could. In New York, there was a lot of public transit. They could use it. I couldn't use it. One day, wake up to me, said, "What's wrong with you? Are you sick?"
Oh,
So that was also when I felt really different because nobody had ever thought about me being sick.
Samuel, you got that too sometimes? People saying, "What's wrong with you? Why doesn't..." Little kids saying, "What's wrong with his legs?"
Yeah. When I was in school, was in 1965 to 1969. That was when Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement was becoming very powerful. And that's when some of the major civil rights legislation, not including disability, was passed. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then also there was the war in Vietnam. And the campus that I was on was opposed to the war in Vietnam. So, and the student government was a pretty activist group of people we had all types of demonstrations and activities protesting the war and many other things. So college for me was, on the one hand, it was difficult because of the lack of accessibility. On the other hand, it was very exciting because I was getting involved in other activities that I had never been involved with.
When did you become a disability rights advocate?
I think just gradually. I'm sure, like yourself, right? The older you get, the more you begin to advocate for yourself. The more your parents begin to take. How old are you now?
I am 16 years old. I'm a sophomore at Concord High School.
Because I think for people like yourself and myself who had our disability either from birth or when we were young, it's really something that gradually happens. I would definitely say I started advocating when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. as we got older, the conversations, changed more. Originally, we would talk about what the problems were and how we felt about the problems. But then as we were getting older, we started talking more about what could we do to correct the problems. Things like, why couldn't buildings be built with ramps? And why couldn't buildings have accessible bathrooms? And why were buses not accessible? And why were trains not accessible? It wasn't easy. For example, when I graduated from high school and I was getting an award, and so everybody getting an award was supposed to be sitting on the stage. And when my father went to pull me up the steps to get on the stage because there was no ramp, the principal came over and said, no, he didn't want me on the stage. And I was like crying. I was really...
What do you think of that?
I told my father and my mother I wanted to go home. And my father said no, and spoke to the principal, and they let me on the stage, but I had to sit in the back row on the stage.
Love is but a song we sing, feels the way we die.
What are your most memorable moments in the disability rights movement?
That ability to get confirmation from each other, that the ideas that we maybe had, or that I had and my friends individually had about what was wrong with the system. And I think also what was important is we stopped thinking about what was wrong with us. That it wasn't me that was the problem. It wasn't my friend, Denise or Bobby or Nancy or any of those people. It wasn't us. It was the system around us that failed to look at us as being an important part of the community.
What role did you have in writing or passing the Americans with Disabilities Act?
So we set up this organization that then began to do a lot of protests against sheltered workshops, against inaccessibility, against the Jerry Lewis Telethon, against many things. It was young disabled activists, and we were doing many, many things. And before the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's a law called Section 504, which you may want to read a little bit about. And I moved from Brooklyn to California. And when I was in California, we started doing a lot of work on this new law.
For the times they are a-changing.
We were there because we had to be there.
We weren't going to take it anymore.
We had to have our civil rights.
And they decide to fight for them on April 5th, 1977. Proud and defiant, 500 to 600 people in wheelchairs with walking canes and hearing aids storm the regional office of Health, Education, and Welfare in San Francisco. Their purpose? To stop discrimination against the disabled, no matter what the consequences. For the disabled, the signing of Regulation 504 is the difference between living and existing.
We're more than handicapped without these laws. We're crippled.
504 means access to public transportation and public spaces. It means free public education and no job discrimination. All basic American civil rights.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
For thousands of disabled people across the nation, the answer is now. In a grassroots movement, they stage a sit-in at 10 HEW offices across the country. In Washington, protesters put newly appointed Secretary Joseph Califano on the hot seat, demanding he sign 504.
I understand how you feel.
No, you don't.
Within 24 hours, the demonstrators are forced out of the federal buildings. Everywhere, that is, except San Francisco. Instead of giving in, they move in. in what will become the longest occupation of a federal building in U.S. history. The community rallies behind the demonstrators as the days pass. The Black Panthers send in cold sandwiches. Others bring in mattresses and a portable shower. Then, finally, 28 days later, the prize at last is theirs. The signing of 504, a victory worth fighting for.
So those were all very important precursors to the ADA, which didn't happen until 1990. You know, there was a core group of people, Justin Dart, Senator Harkin, Congressman Coelho, Bobby Silverstein, Pat Wright, Marilyn Golden, many of those people. I worked with them. I was in California, they were in Washington. So I came to Washington a number of times. I testified at the hearings. I participated in demonstrations. I worked with them on language. I reviewed language. So, you know, I played, for me, an important role in what was going on in the development of the ADA.
What do you think are the most important aspects of the Americans with Disabilities Act?
So I think enforcement is very important, and the fact that government agencies have responsibility. So the Department of Justice has certain responsibilities, the Department of Education, Department of Housing, all these other agencies. In many countries, that's not the case. People look to the ADA as a very, very important piece of legislation, and as of today, still the strongest piece of legislation in the world, anti-discrimination legislation in the world on disability.
From 1993 to 2001, Judy served in the Clinton administration in the Department of Education. She was responsible for special education, disability research, vocational rehabilitation, and independent living. Judy is currently the Special Advisor for International Disability Rights at the U.S. Department of State. She travels the world promoting disability rights. How would you rate the United States on inclusion, accessibility, and disability rights?
Laws that we have in the U.S. are stronger than laws in other countries, in part because, like, the ADA covers both public buildings and private buildings. It covers new construction and renovation. So education, I think, is a very interesting question. And as far as inclusion itself is concerned, I would say that we still, as a rule, are doing much more work in this area than many other countries. Now, countries like Australia and New Zealand, and some European countries, may be on par, you know, doing similar levels of work. Other countries, even including countries like Germany, are still not where we are.
Are you in a relationship, and if so, does your spouse or partner help you in your disability rights work?
So my husband, Jorge, he has a disability himself, and he works at a Center for Independent Living. And I think he supports the work that I do. And he, in his own right, is an activist, but he's kind of more reserved than I am.
Do you have children?
No, I didn't get married till I was 44. So I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and grandnieces and nephews.
What is your biggest insecurity?
My biggest insecurity is the work that I've been doing at the State Department is because President Obama created this position. There's no guarantee that this position, whether it's me or somebody else, that this position will continue after the elections, you know, depending on who wins.
What have you overcome that you are most proud of?
I guess fear of speaking out, you know, I mean, over the years, it's really something that I've learned that for me, it's very important to speak out at the moment and to encourage other people to do the same thing.
What's the most important thing that non-disabled people can do to help people with disabilities?
I mean, I think learn about who we are and learn about our culture and, you know, living in a community, it's all of our responsibility to make the communities we live in a better place for everybody. And, but also to be respectful of the voices of disabled people. People need to listen and learn from us.
What kind of assumptions do you think people still make about you because of your disability?
People are always amazed at my level of energy. They assume that I'm going to get tired. Some people just, you know, Samuel, they look at us like we're invisible.
Who has been your biggest supporter or influence?
Activists, you know, people who have addressed adversity. You know, I get inspired by people who demonstrate in their own right what they do to fight through prejudice and discrimination.
What would you consider your biggest accomplishment?
Listening to people.
Thank you so much for your time. I hope to meet you in person someday.
Me too. Hi, Proton. Hi, honey.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you so much for doing me podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.